let's begin my game with you. The one who holds the highest number, answer me! You will be the first to roll the dice and begin my game and your nightmare.
I think we should talk about that now. Hi, my name's Dave Adams and welcome to Nerds of Wisdom. Last time on Nerds of Wisdom, Ricky posed the discussion topic of how the digital space and the tabletop space are merging together. Before I get into that, I think it's worth asking, why is it that people prefer tabletop games to digital games? I know my answer is reflected in a lot of my friends in that tabletop offers a more personal, face-to-face, more tactile experience. I don't just mean the fact that I can move pieces around a board, though that is incredibly fun, but also the fact that I can sit down and have really great gaming experiences with someone else that's in the room. A lot of gaming experiences today are done online or through servers with headphones or messages popping up on the screen. In a board gaming evening, you're really required to spend time with people, enjoying time with people. And for me, that's kind of the crux of a board gaming experience, is I want to spend the time with the people that are there. Adding to that thought, I also feel with board games that there is the chance to really have an impact on the game state. What I mean by that is that a lot of video games tend to come down to how well I can develop eye-hand coordination. Or if it's not eye-hand coordination, it's learning to just simply get the right combination of buttons at the right particular time, or solving a specific puzzle. One of the key factors with a board game is that the game state should change in response to the player. So that means that when I play a turn in a board game, that has a genuine impact for other players making decisions as well as for the game itself. And often the game will change as a result of those decisions. Often the video game is just about you as a player learning how to beat the game. And I don't want to get too caught up in the arguments here, because I know that there would be a lot of reason to go back and forth and to make cases for and against. But needless to say that there are a lot of people who genuinely just like board games, people who love video games, people who love both. But for me, as much as I love both, I prefer board games because of the difference in experience. So when it comes to digital technologies encroaching or impacting on the tabletop experience, we've got to try and ask, firstly, what do we mean by that? So when we start talking about digital technologies, it's important to try and clarify some of our terms, because digital technologies may include electronics, but these electronics store data and have a way of, I suppose, processing that information. This is different from simple electronics, because if we were looking at simple electronics, then the first game we would have to look at is probably Operation. Yes, that wonderful surgical game where young and old apply their best dexterity to try and remove ailments from the human body, but being careful not to touch the sides lest they trigger the small circuit and cause the man's nose to buzz, which was a perfectly valid and wonderful electronic addition to a board game. Because when we think about it, that board game wouldn't make sense without those electronics. This wasn't just tacked on as a gimmick, this was an essential element of the game, and in fact the game wouldn't work without it. I mean, sure, you could take away the electric circuit and just hopefully someone notices if you touch the side, but that's a far harder game and that'd create more arguments, and I think it would just be a little bit less interesting. No, Operation works because it's got an electric circuit going through there and because that man's nose buzzes every time you touch the side. But we're not just here to discuss simple electronics. And I guess where I'm going to start is a bit of a blurry line, because in some senses, I don't think this game really fits digital technologies, but it was at least a significant contribution to board gaming that a lot of other games started to follow suit and to copy it, and I think became a bit of a precursor for what digital technologies could become. And that is in fact the game Nightmare, or as some innovations of it were known as Atmosphere. It was essentially the same game. In Nightmare, the board game was a simple roll and move. You rolled your piece around the board, you did whatever the space you landed on told you to do, and your goal was to collect the keys for your player. Each player had a certain number of colored keys and you had to collect them, which meant you had to roll on the right spaces. Which sounds just like a really dull, boring game, and perhaps it is, but the added element to this was this guy here.
The gatekeeper!
Now, this guy adds two key things to this game. Firstly, he is a meddler. He provides rewards and penalties to players for interacting with the game differently.
Whose turn is it next? Who is just about to roll the dice? Answer me! Time's up. If you fail to answer yes, my gatekeeper, in time, you must roll a 6 before you can play again.
If people fail to say yes, gatekeeper, then they get penalized. And that's up to the other players to notice that as well. If he calls your number, or if you happen to be in the space that he requires, then, well, you either receive a reward or a punishment. And this meddles with the game. It means that it's not just a simple straight roll and move anymore. It means that there are issues with you trying to achieve your goal. In addition to this, there is the timer, which means that this game cannot take longer than 60 minutes. If it reaches 60 minutes and no player has received all of the keys for their character, then everybody loses and the gatekeeper wins. What this is doing is providing a chance for positional heuristics. People get a sense of where they're at in the game. It doesn't really provide much information for operational heuristics because players don't have many decisions to make about the game. It's still a roll and move. Now, while I haven't played the game, because even when I was a kid, it still sounded just a little bit lame, I have made the time to watch several different groups play the game through and have enjoyed some of these rather raucous adventures. And I'll link to some of those in the description below. What I got out of watching those games, though, was that this really did add that element to the game that made it interesting. Without it, I dare say, no one would have played it. What I do get the sense is that after you played it, maybe even more than just once, you would get a general sense of when he's going to appear at approximately what time. And so you might, if you think it's a bonus, try and slow down your turn so that he appears on your turn. Or if you think it's a penalty, move through a little bit faster so that the next person gets it. But it did provide some interaction between the board game and the players, and I think that that was the development that I think was essential, or is essential, for digital technologies. We would think that with the development of apps and the advancements in digital technologies, that this interaction between the board game and the player would have developed even further. However, that's not necessarily the case. There is a bit of a misconception that just because something includes digital technologies, that it's somehow a development on or even better than what came before it. And that simply hasn't proved true. For the majority of apps that have been developed for board games, many of them have just simply turned the board game itself into a digital version of what you can play on your table. What I mean by that is that all it really does is takes the physical components and makes them digital, and it does some of the gameplay for you. So instead of me having to roll dice, it will use a random generator and roll its own form of dice. Now, there's big bonuses to that, don't get me wrong. I mean, playing Agricola on digital technologies is way easier than doing it in real life, because what it does do is it ensures that you are following certain rules properly, which is not something you can guarantee in a tabletop experience. What it also does is it means that there is absolutely no setup and pack down. That is, especially Agricola, that is just phenomenal. The other advantage to having tabletop games in a digital format is that it means that I don't really need other people at the ready to play. I can play just against the game's AI components. So in a game of Ticket to Ride, I can play up to 6 players with me as the only human in the mix. But on top of that, there is also the element that these games can start to build online communities. The other side of this is I can build competitive online communities. Now, Hearthstone has an online community that utilizes the trading card or a collectible card game and has a competitive element. But now Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic have joined the ranks. And their tournaments are just as impacting on my rankings, and the rewards are just as real as any physical tournament that I go to. But it's not all roses for these digital versions of tabletop games. I mean, the real question does come down to that if you are going to play a digital version of a tabletop game, well, why not just play a video game to begin with? And even if you are playing the digital version, then sometimes it just comes down to the fact that the AIs will never be as good as a real-life opponent. AIs won't interact in the same way that real-life opponents will, and they won't see through strategies or tactics. They're programmed to watch for certain things, but they're just never quite as good and never quite as capable. And once you really do work out how an AI thinks and works, then the game can sometimes become predictable and boring. And this is nothing to say of what is perhaps one of the biggest conspiracy theories in digital online games, and that's the randomizers. I am sure that they are programmed to just screw me on multiple levels until I've played it enough so that it will let me progress through. I just don't trust them. I liked Dead Man's Draw, I got the app, I played it, and I grew suspicious of it, and I put it away until I got the physical copy. And I tell you what, the physical copy plays out way better than the actual app. I trust that physical copy, because if I get screwed over, I know it's because those cards came out in a really poor random fashion, not because some app decided I was going to lose the game. That idea of tabletop games being on digital platforms isn't really the benefit of digital technologies. I don't really see that as an advancement on anything. It's just the same game, but now I have online competitors that I can play with anytime, which is good, but I don't know that that's really doing anything more than what the physical copy can do. The question is, does that transform the gaming hobby? Does that transform the game? And I'd have to say, no. Perhaps the best advancement so far is games like XCOM. XCOM provides an app which is essential for playing the game. And in some senses, it's really just a more complex development of what Nightmare offered. But I don't want that to sound reductionist, because that app is essential for playing the game. And it does more than just stifle you in the game and provide rewards and penalties. Now, it's not like playing against some super AI that can make decisions on the basis of how the people are playing. We're not at that level yet. But it does provide some level of interaction between the game and the players. It gives you the option of providing feedback to it, so that if the team has failed to do something, then it adjusts its measurements and it takes that information in, and then it applies that information meaningfully to the rest of the game. Although XCOM is still really just a development of Nightmare, it's a significant development. And it's using digital technologies in a way that I think is meaningful for the digital technologies, in that it's taking information, storing information, using that information in ways that make sense, and interacting with the players all the while doing it. Now, Mansions of Madness is perhaps an example of a trend that's also occurring, where it essentially takes a one versus all game mechanic and turns it into app versus all game mechanic, where everyone now gets the chance to be cooperative instead of having one person who plays against everyone else. Now, I don't really know if that is such a great development or a step forward in the world of digital technologies. Now, I don't really know that that is such a big development in the way that XCOM is. It's essentially just taking a standard part of the game and taking the complexities and just giving it over to an AI. In the same way that some games take away those problematic algorithms that players would have to do and just gives them to the app to do now. But the question is, for me, where does this really go? And I have spoken about this before, but I think for me that there is a lot of space available for greater game interaction using apps. And the question is, where to from here? And I've talked in previous videos about the introduction of augmented reality as a potential game changer for board games. It essentially means that you could sell someone a very scaled down version of a game, but the app provides a whole element to the play that just can't be done by physical representation. Such things as ghosts or specters or clues in murder mysteries, or just gaming elements or problems that come along as the game story progresses, could be done through the lens of the camera and overlaid with the digital technologies in the app itself. So much like how a Pokemon appears in the real world when you're looking through your Pokemon Go app, player pieces or game events could occur on the board as players look through their lenses. And if everybody has their own phones in the game, then everybody could theoretically be seeing something different about the game, providing multiple perspectives. Now, I love to dream about the sorts of things that digital technologies can do in board gaming, and it's a really great thing to consider, except there's maybe one big hindrance holding all this back. And that's the fact that board games just don't have the sales. When you consider what it takes to build an app and to keep it updated, to continue to develop that app, that's a lot of cost and a lot of ongoing cost at that. In fact, one game that tried to really integrate digital technologies into the gameplay itself by providing stats on game pieces and using microcodes in the pieces themselves and on the board to provide information to the app was the game Golem Arcana. Now, Golem Arcana was really a great advancement, but it's a game I only recently heard of, and the reason being is that the app is no longer supported. It costs too much. And the reality is board games just don't sell like video games. It's not the same level of risk as with a video game. Board games are certainly doing well, and they're certainly growing, they're certainly on the up and up, but they're not at the sales level of, well, anything that EA is releasing. Occasionally you get a game like Pandemic Legacy, which does incredibly well and sells well, or Ticket to Ride, which made Alan Moore a multimillionaire, but they're more rare. And the idea of trying to develop an app for a game in the hopes that it might sell that well is perhaps just too big a risk to take. I guess the reality is that for the time being, until board games start having the sales of other industries or video games, then we're really just going to have to deal with the fact that a lot of digital technologies are going to be digital technologies that were developed or perfected in other fields and other areas. Board games are just going to have to be a bit of Johnny-come-lately when it comes to applying the digital technologies in their tabletop spaces. And so I really have an optimistic view of what digital technologies and tabletop spaces can do as they start to come and interact more. And I'm excited about the future. I just know that we probably don't have the budget for any of these advances to be real game changers for the time being. So I've enjoyed talking about digital technologies and how they interact with the tabletop gaming world. But Ricky, my question for you is this: how do the people you play with impact your gaming experience, or even the games you choose to play? But that's all we've got time for today. Now, normally I would tell you to go and look at my articles on Gamerpalooza, but they're actually taking a break while they upgrade the website. Until then, go and check out what's in the archive and maybe have a hunt around for a few of my articles if you're looking. Next week will be the next core mechanic. If you haven't already checked it out, we looked at Cluedo last week, but go check out this Monday will be the next episode for season 3. The following week, Ricky will be back with his response to my question. Until then, thanks for watching. Please, if you like what we're doing, hit that like button. If you're new to this community, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's topic in the comments section below. Maybe you've got some games that you think interact well with digital technologies, or maybe you've got a vision for the future of digital technologies in tabletop gaming, and I would love to hear it. Put them in the comments section below. Until next time, my name's Dave Adams. Thanks for watching.